Hello, everyone. I'm here talking about the genetic disorder I've been researching throughout this semester, homocystinuria. Um, while it's a rare genetic disorder, depending, well, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but depending where you are in the world, it's a little bit more prevalent than in some places than it is in others. So, moving on, some key characteristics of homocystinuria. It's a genetic disorder, affects a person's ability to process and break down certain amino acids. So, amino acids that you get from your diet, the people affected by this disorder are just unable to, metabolize some of those amino acids, and it affects their development. The main key aspect of homocystinuria is early detection. So the earlier you're able to detect it, the better the prognosis is, or uh, the the more you're able to slow those changes down, or slow the effects of this genetic disorder down. Noted here, first discovered or first really talked about or researched in 1962, and presents itself both in early age and later in life. It can be now it can be detected in prenatal testing, and generally around as early as age 3 is where some of those uh, changes from the disorder will start to show. So prevalence, I talked about this a little bit before, but it affects roughly 1 in 200,000 in the U.S. But moving outside the U.S., much more common, mainly Qatar is 1 in 1,800 people, much more common in the Middle East, and some research has shown why this might be, and there are many theories out there, but generally the main theory is that in some Middle Eastern and Asian countries, the amount of you know cousin relationships or familial relationships has increased the amount of carriers and crossing over in terms of inheritance, which brings me to my next slide, which does touch on the inheritance and how homocystinuria actually affects the body. So it is an autosomal recessive disorder, meaning that you have to have two parents who are carriers, or one affected and one carrier. If both parents are carriers, then there's a 25% chance of one of their children suffering from this disorder. The main mutation is on the cystathionine beta synthase gene. This is the most common. There are some different mutations on genes involving methionine, but this CBS gene is the most common by far. So signs and symptoms of this disorder, there are the four main, these are the four main organ systems that are affected, most commonly eyes, vascular and skeletal, and central nervous system. So the eyes, the main effect it has is on the lens of the eye. So people who are affected by this disorder and go untreated, or their treatment isn't as effective, they can have what's called a lens detachment, affecting their sight. And then the other three, vascular, skeletal, and central nervous system, are all kind of intertwined in terms of all of the someone who's affected by homocystinuria, and it is kind of relatively further along than most, will affect their development. So it starts with the skeletal. They're not able to walk as quickly or sit up as quickly as other children of their age. And then that goes into the central nervous system in terms of it affects their muscle tone, which then can affect their development. And then the slowing of that development of the central nervous system, unfortunately, moves into like mental learning disabilities and other similar disorders, or other similar deficits. This is why, like I was saying before, kind of early detection is the best way to combat this disorder. And later on, I'll touch on treatments, but the earlier you're able to start treating this disorder, start combating some of these effects, the quicker or the more stable the person will become, and that allows them to live a longer, much more unaffected life. So touching back on inheritance, this is a general pedigree of a family that is affected by homocystinuria. As you can see here, the father is affected and the mother is a carrier, and this basically breaks down for them that 50% of their children will end up being affected. So as you can see here, both they had their daughter and son were affected, and then their other daughter, or the other son and daughter were both carriers. And then, as you can see, if the affected son is lucky enough to meet and reproduce with a non-carrier, non-affected person, it's safe to say that they are able to produce children that are not affected by this disorder, though they are carriers. And then over here, while being relatively rare, it is possible for one of the carrier children who is a carrier to then meet and reproduce with someone else who is a carrier, thus kind of starting the cascade again by producing a daughter that is affected. So while it is a very rare disorder, it does this is kind of how it finds its way into families and inheritances, and continues to produce, just because it is a relatively non-fatal. It doesn't create very early death, so it allows these people to kind of move on and live their lives and reproduce, and thus continuing on the disorder. So testing, mainly it's in most newborn testing panels, which are required in most states throughout the United States. Mainly 5 standard tests. Some of them test the parents if they're carriers, and then some tests for other variants that may show up and turn into the disorder later on in their inheritance or in their pedigree. But improvements in treatment has increased the longevity of these affected. So like I was saying before, testing and detection, which can lead to early treatment, is the best way. So like I was saying before as well, so these tests span the entire coding sequence, so they are getting more and more accurate, more and more expansive, and then increased awareness and increased research has created these improvements in testing. So treatment options. So in terms of like medications or pharmaceuticals, the research isn't totally conclusive on great pharmaceuticals or medications for this disorder, and mainly it's a diet-based treatment. Diets low in protein and methionine tend to be the most effective. Your homocysteine levels in the blood are checked regularly to make sure that everything is going well. But unfortunately, some people just don't react well to, or their body doesn't react well to the low protein diet or low methionine diet. And in that case, there are vitamins that have some research has shown to improve this condition. So the research has kind of, a lot of the research I found over the course of the semester is relatively recent, and like I said earlier, in 1962 it's pretty much when they started really heavily researching this, and so they're still developing treatments, largely diet vitamin based, like I said before, and the main brunt of this research is non-invasive, accurate ways to test and detect this disorder early on. So a couple things to touch on in terms of along with treatment. So some of this genetic disorder can create like orthopedic issues, whether it's bone deformities, muscle deformities, and specifically issues with the eyes. And some of those are able to be addressed through surgery, and those are effective and successful surgeries. It's just the big touching point through some of the research I was reading is that uh, due to the vascular changes with patients who are affected by this disorder, it does increase their risk of post-surgical blood clots. And it's just one other thing to look out for, and one increased risk when they are trying to combat some of these other effects of this disorder. So in closing, just some pearls to take home with. So homocystinuria is a disorder that relies mainly on early detection to offer the best prognosis, whether that's with newborn testing, prenatal testing. All of these things help detect and help form a treatment plan very early on, and get these people treated before before some of these lasting effects are irreversible. Testing for carriers is growing and is becoming much more popular, much more accurate, and provides valuable information for parents out there. All right, here are my references, and thank you.